Picture this. The year is 1923. We're in Cairo at the Grand Continental Hotel, where a wealthy British lord is in absolute agony, just burning up with a fever. At exactly 1:55 in the morning, he takes his last breath. And in that very instant, the entire city of Cairo is plunged into darkness. Miles and miles away, back in England, his favorite dog lets out this sudden howl and then just drops dead. Now here's the kicker. Only a few months before, this very same lord had pried open a 3,000-year-old tomb. And this was the chilling warning that was supposedly carved right at the entrance of that tomb. It's the phrase that launched a legend, the one we all know as the curse of King Tutankhamun. But as we're about to see, the line between a historical event and a sensational myth, well, it can get awfully blurry. So our story really kicks off in November 1922. After years and years of searching, a British archaeologist named Howard Carter finally hits the jackpot. He's found the tomb of a pretty obscure pharaoh, Tutankhamun. I mean, the discovery was absolutely monumental. But almost immediately, something strange happened. Something the locals saw as the curse's very first terrifying move. Okay, so first, the tomb is opened. Then, just a few weeks later, Carter's pet canary, his good luck charm, is found dead in its cage, eaten by a cobra. Now, for the Egyptian workers, this was a massive red flag. The cobra is a symbol of the pharaohs, right? A protector of royalty. It was like the king's spirit had struck back. And then, just a few months after that, the man funding the whole thing, Lord Carnarvon, was dead. And just like that, a legend was born. After Lord Carnarvon's death, the story didn't just leak out, it exploded. The media all over the world grabbed onto this idea of a vengeful pharaoh, and pretty soon, any death that was even remotely connected to the expedition got blamed on the curse. It was just the perfect storm, you know? Ancient mystery meets modern media frenzy. You have to imagine headlines just like this one plastered everywhere. They were fanning the flames of public fascination, turning what were probably just unrelated tragedies into one single terrifying story. Every death wasn't just a sad event anymore, it was another chapter in a real-life horror story. And the list of these so-called victims just kept on growing. It had visitors like the American financier George J. Gould, who died from a fever right after his visit. It had family members like Lord Carnarvon's own half-brother. It even included the team's radiologist and, in a real ironic twist, the very reporter who'd done the most to push the curse story in the first place. Every new death just got added to the tally. By 1929, the number of deaths the media had connected to this curse had reached a staggering 22. The story became so powerful that even unrelated family tragedies, like a grieving father taking his own life, got sucked into the legend. The curse's power seemed to be growing more and more devastating. But, okay, let's just pause the horror story for a minute and ask a really important question. Who was the actual person at the center of all this? Was Tutankhamun really this all-powerful pharaoh capable of setting a 3,000-year-old curse in motion? Well, the historical reality, it paints a very, very different picture. To really understand the truth, we've got to look at his family tree. For generations, Egyptian royals practiced inbreeding, trying to keep their bloodline pure. And we now know for a fact that Tutankhamun's parents were brother and sister. From a modern genetics point of view, that's a recipe for some pretty devastating health problems. Tutankhamun was anything but a mighty king. He had a really severe clubfoot. He couldn't even walk without a cane. In fact, they found over 130 walking sticks in his tomb. He also suffered from something called Cooler's disease, a super painful bone disorder, and DNA from his mummy shows he had malaria multiple times. The truth is, he was a frail boy king who died when he was just 18 or 19. He was so politically unimportant that later pharaohs actually erased his name from their records. This is hardly the profile of some vengeful, all-powerful spirit, is it? So, if the pharaoh himself was this frail and basically forgotten kid, where on earth did this powerful curse come from? Well, when you start to really look at the evidence, you find that the legend was built piece by piece on a foundation of pure fiction. Let's start with that famous inscription, right? Death shall come on swift wings. The newspapers claimed it was found on a clay tablet at the tomb's entrance. The reality? It never existed. Not at all. Years later, the truth finally came out. A reporter kept pestering one of the team members about a curse, and instead of just saying no, the guy just smiled. And from that one smile, the reporter made up the entire story of the tablet. The most famous curse in the world was literally born from a journalist's imagination. And what about all those spooky coincidences? That citywide blackout in Cairo? Not that weird. If you look at historical records, power outages were actually pretty common back in the 1920s. And as for Carnarvon's dog, well, when you factor in the time difference between Egypt and England, it turns out the dog died hours after its owner, not at the exact same moment. That spooky timing was just another media exaggeration. So, if the supernatural claims were all made up, what about the deaths themselves? This is where science, not superstition, gives us the most compelling answers. The explanation isn't in ancient magic, but in the medical and environmental realities of the 1920s. One pretty popular scientific theory involves pathogens, basically germs. Some scientists have suggested that a type of mold, something like Aspergillus niger, could have been sealed up inside that tomb for 3,000 years. And when the tomb was opened, these dormant spores could have been breathed in by the explorers, possibly causing fatal respiratory infections, especially in people who were already a bit frail. But the most logical explanation for the most famous death, Lord Carnarvon's, is actually much simpler, and it's all grounded in medical reality. First, he wasn't in great health to begin with. Second, the whole thing started with a simple mosquito bite, which he then made worse by accidentally cutting it while he was shaving. And third, and this is the big one, this was 1923. Penicillin wouldn't be discovered for another 5 years. In a world before antibiotics, a simple skin infection could easily turn into a death sentence. But really, the single most powerful piece of evidence against the curse isn't about how people died. It's about who lived. This is the final nail in the coffin for the entire myth. I mean, think about it. If there was some vengeful spirit protecting this tomb, who would its main targets be? It would be the people who disturbed it the most directly, right? The people who planned the whole thing, who were the first ones inside, and who physically handled the mummy. So let's just take a look at what happened to those key people. Lady Evelyn, one of the very first people to step into the burial chamber, lived to be 78. Dr. Douglas Derry, the guy who performed the actual autopsy on Tutankhamun's mummy, lived to the ripe old age of 87. And what about the number one target? The man who led the entire operation, Howard Carter himself. Howard Carter, the man who physically broke the seal, who stepped inside first, and who spent the next decade cataloging every single treasure, he lived for another 16 years. He died of natural causes in 1939 at the age of 64. The one person who should have been the curse's first victim outlived the legend by almost 2 decades. For the rest of his life, whenever anyone asked Carter about the curse, his simpler response was, "I am still alive." You know, the ancient Egyptians believed you only truly die when your name is spoken for the last time. For 3,000 years, Tutankhamun was effectively dead, forgotten. Carter's discovery didn't bring a curse. It brought a resurrection. It made an obscure boy king the most famous pharaoh in history. So the real question isn't about a supernatural curse. It's about how a sensational story can grant a forgotten king